Everyday Samurai, Episode 59. Greetings, friends, and welcome to Everyday Samurai, in service to your liberty and the security of a free state. How do you do? I trust that you are doing well. I thank you for joining us for another episode of exploring the principles of mindset, martial art, and the science of political economy for the benefit of securing liberty in our lifetime. I recently listened to a podcast interview with Eric Prince, who's a former Navy SEAL and the founder of the Blackwater Training Center, as well as the Blackwater Contracting Company that provided private military services to U.S. government entities in Iraq, Afghanistan, and other places around the world before striking out into other ventures. And discussing the current state of conflict in Ukraine versus Russia, Israel versus Hamas, and other locations, taking notice of the phrase when he said that men with drones are defeating men with rifles, that a new era in the modes of combat is emerging, thanks to additive manufacturing, artificial intelligence, and large language model learning with computers, as well as the ability to manufacture very cost-effective means of attacking large-scale combat systems. For example, a quadcopter drone with a 3D printed explosive formed penetrator, or an EFP, a shape charge, if you will, very light and very inexpensive, can take out a multi-million-dollar armored vehicle. I've also taken notice of this same phenomena in Myanmar, or the former Burma, in which quote-unquote rebels are taking out the regime or the junta controlling that geographic land space using 3D printed rifles, also known as the FGC-9, parts that they can either 3D print or combine with regular hardware store items. The challenge, of course, is finding ammunition. But the point I'm trying to make is that conflict and the way interpersonal combat is being carried out currently is a manifestation of technological change, and we too must be ready for technological change, recognizing that the stability that we enjoy in the developed world, the United States and Western civilization, and even here in Japan, is subject to great fragility. All of this can change with great rapidity, which is an indication of volatility. So why then is studying an armed martial art in the samurai tradition so significant? Put it very clearly, the samurai didn't use swords very much on the battlefield. It was all about horse and bow for a very long time until you got in close, and then either it was using a spear, or when you get into an armored grappling situation, it was more short swords and daggers. But when there were periods of peace, the samurai studied the sword because it is the most effective way for understanding combat geometry and learning how to shape yourself, your physical body, and your mind in relation to force vectors. Combat geometry also applies in law enforcement, in close quarters battle, hostage rescue, and things of those kinds, because entering into a room is a cube, a stairwell is a rectangle, and understanding that angles of vulnerability are crucial to covering the bases, to moving safely, to reaching objectives, and to clearing hostilities. Nothing teaches situational awareness better than understanding combat geometry. And more importantly, when you study edged weapons engagement and interpersonal edged weapons engagement more specifically, you have to recognize certain things about the physical body, its vulnerabilities, and just how much you must change inside in order to survive in that environment. Physical fitness is an essential aspect of healthy living, yet at the same time, thick muscles are no match to sharp steel. How do you shape yourself in relation to those force vectors becomes increasingly crucial to your survival. Cannot resist against force vectors, and learning edged weapons engagement is the best way to inculcate those principles so that you offer no resistance to life. How are you going to resist against a sniper? How do you resist against a drone attack? We have footage now of soldiers in the Ukraine conflict on both sides being attacked by low-cost drones, and camera footage of the drone closing in on the target, and the target is blessing himself because he knows it's over. And then the explosion happens and the camera footage goes to black. Are you prepared to be at one with yourself and at peace with your maker in those final moments. There are certain things that are beyond your control, and you have to surrender yourself to fate at some point, even if it appears to be ironic. Like a dog's death, the Inu Samurai, a dog samurai, or Inu Shinu, a dog's death looked upon by others as disgraceful, yet sometimes it's beyond your control. Jingi Naki Tatakai, Battles Without Humanity or Honor. Famous Yakuza movie series was titled. We have to learn to get comfortable with things that are beyond our control. We have to learn to let go of resistance to what is and surrender into the fullness of who we are. And this is also the basis for non-resistance in your combative system. When you learn that certain things are futile, then you can find the gaps and the seam and the ability to prevail right up to the very end, regardless of circumstance. That is why we study, and that is why we train. And recognizing that there are always angles of opportunity in every situation. I don't propose to offer any solutions to a drone attack to individuals at this point, but we can rise above those situations so that conflict dissipated before it even starts. And that's why we study the principles of political economy, to bring about a private property legal order where everyone is secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects. What legal political institutions are best suited to secure a free state? Everybody's enamored with this idea of the Second Amendment for their own personal self-defense, and that's not why it exists in the Constitution for the United States. It has a political purpose, to secure a free state. Yes, of course you have the right to self-defense. Yes, of course you have the right to private property, including the arms necessary for securing yourself, your loved ones, and your possessions, and your business interests. That, of course, was recognized from the Enlightenment philosophy that gave birth to the revolution in the United States as inherent to everyone. And no politician or bureaucrat has the right to remove those rights from the individuals for which they are supposed to be administering justice and security. But of course, it's not as lucrative to allow people to be secure. Politicians live from parasitism and predation. Therefore, they have to figure out ways of generating conflict in order to justify the further taking. So, go back to the political purpose of the Second Amendment. It is to secure a free state from the tyrannical ambitions of politicians, bureaucrats, oligarchs, and other string pullers, as well as the parasites on the dole that are always crying for more welfare. And that includes the military-industrial congressional complex industries and actors that are also on the dole, surviving on nothing but tax revenue, and the debasement of the currency that keeps the system floating. This is why I wrote a book called Money, Militia, and the Market, 3 elements that are necessary for securing liberty. You need a free market in arms, a free market in money, including money generated by political entities. The general government of the United States is authorized to coin money using gold and silver that they purchase on the free market. And anyone should be able to mint gold and silver so long as it's certified or certifiable. And that's one service that the general government of the United States was supposed to provide. But of course, politicians and bureaucrats can't be trusted. This is why the Second Amendment, in conjunction with Article 1, Section 8, Clauses 15 and 16, is so necessary to securing a free state. We, the people, as militia at the local level, are supposed to execute the law, to make sure that even politicians and bureaucrats do not abuse their delegated authority. But none of that is going to come into fruition until people start to recognize that self-defense is not the purpose of the Second Amendment, nor is it the purpose for training in martial art. There is a higher social purpose, a higher political purpose, a contribution of citizenship that is a cultural requisite for living in a free state. So the welfare, warfare, regulatory state will persist, and things will continue to devolve until politicians, bureaucrats, oligarchs, string pullers, parasites, and everyone else that lives from this corrupt system are put in check. Thankfully, we do have the Second Amendment as the supreme law of the land in the United States. It just needs enforcing. Who's going to enforce it? We the people. And we the people, quite frankly, have not suffered enough to start asking questions about what to do and what actual solutions are available. And when they do, I am hoping, and that's why I'm taking this effort to read the works of Dr. Edwin Vieira, particularly this book by Tyranny Out of Necessity, The Bastardy of Martial Law, because we see the trappings and the makings of a police state where only the police have arms. That is the antithesis to a free state. And the travesties of justice are manifest all around us. However, it need not necessarily be that way. There can be change. There can be a release to the illusion of the political environment we find ourselves in now and a restoration of the principles of liberty. And the way is in training. Individuals training their minds, bodies, spirits, and conditioning their affairs so that they are in a position to offer a contribution to the security of a free state. That's why we become personally strong, healthy, fit, technically, tactically trained, and holding the resources necessary to make a positive contribution, which is why I advocate for getting out of fiat-denominated currencies, acquiring gold, silver, and Bitcoin, as well as other preparations such as weapons and ammunition and food and medical supplies, and having contingency plans in place, conducting area studies so that you know key information about how to survive in the event of civil disorder or humanitarian disasters and things along those lines. And also to develop your mind to understand the principles of political economy and what it takes to secure a free state. So I'll dive into chapter 3 of Dr. Edwin Vieira's book, where he starts to discuss a little bit more about why this situation of martial governance, tantamount to martial law, is being enacted to the benefit of corrupt public officials. And then later on, we can talk about a little bit more about what to do with that situation to remedy it. So, chapter 3, the ultimate reasons why the Homeland Security Establishment is preparing to unleash the full force of martial governance against America. Americans fully aware of the ever-increasing encroachments upon the blessings of liberty will never fail to recognize the necessity to take action in their own defense, as well as the nature of that act. Planning, though, must always precede action, and an adequate plan depends upon an accurate evaluation of the situation. No clear-thinking American can possibly doubt that under color of the war on terrorism, rogue public officials in both the general government and many of the states' governments are preparing at a feverish pace for the imposition throughout the United States of martial governance, to be administered by a national paramilitary police state apparatus, which, in its purpose, structure, operations, and methods, seems to be modeled on Heinrich Himmler's vision of Nazi Germany. At first, the tempo of this goose-stepping march was andante, now it is presto. Obviously, rogue officialdom anticipates a catastrophic event or set of events which will affect the entire country in the near future, and the dire consequences of which nothing but the machinery of a full-blown police state will be capable of controlling. Indeed, why would any public officials go to so much trouble to erect such a complex and costly apparatus so quickly unless they expected to employ it to its full potential sometime soon? What events of that nature to which such a response would be required are actually predictable, though? One can discount at once such possibilities as a nuclear war or a deadly pandemic. And remember, Dr. Vieira wrote this in 2015. With hindsight, we might change that idea about nuclear war or a deadly pandemic post the Charlie 19er incident and the brinksmanship that's taking place in Ukraine and possibly even Taiwan. These are no more likely in the foreseeable future than they have been in the recent past. And although either or both of them might have occurred during the many decades following World War II, no one in official positions have ever done anything to prepare for the effects of either of them by way of creating a comprehensive plan for homeland security, which took into account the entirety of America's territory and population in the thoroughgoing manner in which a national police state apparatus does. As for natural disasters, recent hurricanes such as Katrina and Sandy, as well as tornadoes in the Midwest and the Plains states, were predictable and even accurately predicted calamities. Yet the big brains in the District of Columbia and the affected states did not prepare beforehand to deal with either the immediate effects or the aftermaths of these events in anything approaching an adequate fashion. Worse yet, these authorities have done little subsequently to enable the mass of Americans living in potentially affected areas to cope with the dangerous storms that are certain to strike them in the near future. After all, crises of these kinds will always occur somewhere in particular, inasmuch as common Americans residing in those locations will be the main victims. They, in particular, will need to be prepared or to become the subjects of preparations made in their interests by others. Sufficient provisions for any truly widespread crises cannot be effected by relatively small bureaucratic agencies operating from a few central locations, such as FEMA or equivalent establishments in each of the states. Rather, adequate preparations must be set in train well in advance of the anticipated disasters and at the local level, by thoroughly mobilizing, organizing, training, and equipping the very people who stand to be most adversely affected by these events through the only institutions which consist of those people and which of those people themselves control, namely the well-regulated militia, which the Second Amendment declares to be necessary to the security of a free state. Revitalization of the militia for these purposes, however, is not taking place anywhere within the United States. Quite the opposite. So, the present big blow to inflate homeland security bureaucracies throughout the federal system has little to do with protecting this country from natural disasters, and other real threats of that type. Nothing comparable to the Department of Homeland Security was ever proposed until public officials trotted out the war on terrorism for nationwide attention after the 9/11 event. This conflict provided the excuse for the United States to engage in overseas, impermanent and wide-ranging military adventures directed primarily at countries in the Middle East and Africa, with strategic importance because of their locations and natural resources. It was and remains l'arme blanche of raw neo-imperialism, commenced with a campaign of aggression arguably conducted largely for the benefit of foreign interests. Notwithstanding these demerits from its inception, the war on terrorism has provided the pretext for the erection of a national police state apparatus within America. This is not surprising in that the type of people who would seize upon aggression against foreigners as a tool of policy would scarcely shrink from repression against Americans at home in order to advance their agenda. Yet the prosecution of that ersatz war cannot explain the breakneck speed at which the DHS has been constructed and its operations expanded. For even a coordinated attack by every terrorist across the globe could not ignite throughout the United States a conflagration sufficient to rationalize deployment of such an apparatus against Americans in general. For example, from time to time, Homeland Security bureaucrats have posited the danger that terrorists might launch an electromagnetic pulse (EMP) attack against or otherwise sabotage the vulnerable national security electrical grid. But a failure of the grid for one reason or another entirely unrelated to terrorism and the havoc it would cause have hung over this country for a long time. Nonetheless, although some high-level security exercises have been conducted, next to nothing has been done to prepare common Americans to live with far less electricity than they consume now, or to teach them how to generate electricity or other forms of power locally from alternative sources under emergency conditions. Alright, let's take a break so I can share a new tool I've added to my daily routine with you. I'm ditching the disposable cartridge razors. I've had enough of those multi-blade monstrosities. It was long past time to find something more in line with my principles and training in samurai-related martial arts. A razor emulating the beauty and function of the single-edged katana, wakizashi, tanto, or kaiken. Even when the samurai trained with or carried two swords, most of them used one blade at a time in combat. Miyamoto Musashi was famous for using the long and short swords simultaneously, but he was a rare exception, and he wrote in the Gorin no Sho that anything done in contravention of training cannot be considered the true way. So, now I'm focusing on the single blade technique to elevate my grooming standards, and you can too with one blade shave. That's right, one blade shave. No more messing with these extra blades that do nothing but scrape away extra skin from your face. One blade shave. This is the way of a cleaner look and healthier skin. It's also a way to build skill in blade handling with every shave. No more short, choppy strokes. Have you ever counted how many strokes it takes to shave your face? Maybe it's time to drive toward greater efficiency. The way of the one blade shave is lather twice, cut thrice. Downward cut, lateral or sideways cut, and then finally, the upward cut. Every shave becomes a skill-building exercise to see how clean I can make my face without resorting to those short, inefficient pulls. I'll tell you what, after 30 days of practice, I couldn't be any happier. My skin is better, my face is smoother, and I feel like every morning I've accomplished something terrific. It takes practice, of course, and a bit of getting used to. That is part of the adventure in owning and using a relentlessly engineered precision tool to bring out the best shaving experience of your life. The one blade is designed in pursuit of excellence, just like the legendary katana of the samurai. And now, every shave can be like doing tameshigiri test cutting in search of the most perfectly efficient cut. No more cutting the underside of your nose with the ridiculous edge trimmers on those overpriced cartridges. No more wrecking your skin with all those extra blades. It's time to adopt a new approach to shaving, and for you to work with the very best tools for the job. You deserve the best. Now it's time to own the best. Your one-blade razor is made in America and uses the sharpest and most reliable Japanese stainless steel blades in the world. Go to everydaysamurai.life/one blade, and and that's one word, to level up your shaving experience. That's everydaysamurai.life/OneBlade. Remember, taking pride in your appearance with a close shave and smooth skin is one of the best ways to elevate your mood and self-esteem. Working with beautiful yet functional equipment is another. Just like a katana or custom pistol. Get the best and be your best. Go to everydaysamurai.life/OneBlade. That's everydaysamurai.life/OneBlade. All right, we now return to our regularly scheduled program in progress. Moreover, if intercepting foreign terrorists before they could strike physically at the grid or at any critical objective within this country's infrastructure were the true raison d'etre of the DHS, that agency's very first step would have been and would still have to be to seal Americans' porous southern border, so that no more terrorists than have already infiltrated the homeland, hidden among millions of illegal aliens, could sneak across it. That task, however, has not been accomplished and stands next to no chance of ever being undertaken by the dysfunctional and disloyal political leadership ensconced for several decades now in the District of Columbia. And I'll pause simply to add an anecdote from my personal experience as a former Border Patrol agent and recent discussions in Congress about a border security bill. I can say from firsthand experience that the DHS, the CBP, and the Border Patrol in particular doesn't need any more resources. It has entirely too many to begin with. They simply don't use them effectively. It is a matter of political will, meaning not having the right leadership to follow through on the actual mission. And then B, it is also a matter of bureaucratic implementation of policy, meaning bureaucracies are simply bastions of socialism. They do not know how to allocate scarce resources to their highest valued ends. Whatever resources you give to these bureaucracies, they will squander. So border security is a massive issue, and DHS is not the solution. To be sure, it is also possible to imagine the nightmarish scenario of a national catastrophe brought about by a massive false flag or black operation set in motion by rogue public officials, run by some domestic or foreign intelligence agency, or instigated and abetted by powerful international financial or corporate interests, such as the simultaneous detonations of nuclear explosives or releases of chemical or biological weapons in several major American cities, or even deliberate destruction of the monetary and banking system, and with them the entire structure of free market prices upon which this country's economy depends. The goal of the perpetrators of such a calamity might well be, probably would be, precisely to destabilize American society in order to condition Americans by uncertainty, fear, division, want, and ultimately desperation, to clamor for radical changes, or at least the radical changes which their political leaders would present to them as their only choices, and then to acquiesce in or be bludgeoned into domestic regime change in the name of national security. This, ironically, would be national security directed against the nation itself, with huge numbers of above-average patriotic Americans to be lumped among the enemy, thus rationalizing the employment of some sort of martial law across the country. Right now, there are hearings going on about the weaponization of the federal government against the American people, and I don't hold much faith in anything coming out of those hearings. However, it is a fact that certain Americans are being targeted by the establishment because of their beliefs, and I've said before, echoing Jeff Dice, politics has dropped its pretenses. It is no longer even pretending to be about serving the common good or upholding universal standards of justice under a common law. It is all about seizing political power and then wielding it against your enemies. It's a regression out of the Enlightenment and back into barbarism. And that is why only radical change in the hearts and minds of the individual citizens and a recognition of the responsibilities of citizenship that can restore constitutional order. Continuing. Such an interpretation of current events has the advantage of explaining why seemingly everything that public officials do these days makes matters progressively worse. After all, they all cannot be that incompetent. At least some of them must want and must have been strategically placed to bring about this kind of negative progress and must have thought through the best way to achieve it. Again, think George Soros and his plants at the local level, including districts of attorney that allow shoplifting to occur and other prosecutions to occur selectively. This is what Sam Francis termed anarcho-tyranny, where the law is not being enforced uniformly, but tyranny is reigning. We see this in San Francisco and other locations that have massive problems with mob violence. Yet, if their purpose were merely to lay this country low so as to provide cover for the imposition of martial governance, to what useful end would martial governance then be directed in a nation so prostrated? Unless this goal were to eliminate the United States as a functioning first world society, such an operation would amount to nothing more than official terrorism and martial governance simply for the sake of official terrorism and martial governance, and thus, one hopes, could be discounted on the grounds that rogue officials capable of devising such a diabolical scheme would have to be sufficiently sane to recognize its insanity. Besides, even were official terrorism the root cause of the problem, it would not require Americans to deviate from the very same plan for self-defense which they should follow if public officials and their controllers and clients were nothing more than dummies rather than devious plotters. The remedy most efficacious in treating the symptoms of the disease, that is, the revitalization of the militia throughout the several states, would eliminate both possible causes too. For neither official stupidity nor official terrorism could fester during any extended period of time in a political environment in which the militia diligently exercised and fulfilled their unique constitutional authority and responsibility to execute the laws of the Union as well as the laws of their own states. The most realistic as well as the least complicated explanation for the feverish pace at which public officials are erecting a national paramilitary police apparatus capable of imposing martial law throughout the country is that they expect a calamitous breakdown of America's monetary and banking systems, with an attendant collapse of this country's entire economy, to take place in the not-so-distant future. This is no mere conspiracy theory, for during the banking crisis of 2008, then Secretary of the Treasury Henry Paulson did threaten certain members of Congress that were America's banking system not bailed out with taxpayers' money, civil unrest, which would require the imposition of martial law, would eventuate. To be sure, public officialdom and its controllers and clients in banking and the underworld of high finance may not have set out conspicuously to create the conditions necessary and sufficient for such a catastrophe. It may be the unintended consequence of their incompetence and imprudence, rather than the fruit of deliberate planning. It may even come to pass as the result of international conflict, which suddenly break out in economic warfare, a new Cold War, or actual warfare, all of which ultimately will benefit no one. With such a calamity, whatever its genesis, now looming over this country, Homeland Security officials imagine that they know how to take full advantage of it for their own nefarious purposes. Even the initial stages of such a calamity would almost certainly convince the masses that martial law of some variety were necessary to provide them with safety, most likely in the forms of food, shelter, medical care, and other basic requirements of life that a nationwide economic collapse would render otherwise unavailable to many average Americans in a timely and sufficient fashion. Of course, the promise of such safety would surely prove illusory, for the same reason that Americans are now confronted with these dangers, namely, that since 1903, rogue public officials have systematically rendered the militia of the several states moribund. Only in recent times have some of the basic security functions which the militia should perform have been assigned to tiny civilian emergency management bureaucracies, in the operations of which the tens of millions of average Americans potentially eligible for the militia play no role. These bureaucracies, however, can easily be predicted to prove incapable of performing the really difficult task for which deployment of the militia would be necessary, or even for which the militia would simply be most suitable. So, although the Homeland Security establishment is correct in predicting that a nationwide catastrophe could work to its immediate advantage, that advantage would very quickly dissipate when the bureaucrats expose themselves as incompetent to mitigate, let alone alleviate, the effects of the disaster. Perhaps one should not dwell too closely on public officials' personal intentions and plans in this regard, though, for both economic theory and the facts of economic life can only support a largely mechanistic, rather than an overly melodramatic and conspiratorial interpretation of contemporary events. After all, central banking based on fiat currency, fractional reserves, and the integration of bank and state is not simply unconstitutional, its conspiratorial aspect, but it's also untenable, its mechanistic defect. In the long run, it, and any economy that workings of which depend upon it, must fail, And the longer the long run persists, the more complete and catastrophic that failure must finally prove to be. So, not surprisingly today, notwithstanding the best laid plans of the men who profit from them, fractional reserve banks, fiat currencies, and the various Ponzi schemes which they enable, unscrupulous speculators to foist upon financial and commodity markets across the world are collapsing everywhere. In particular, global markets and foreign nations seem poised to abandon the Federal Reserve note as the de facto world reserve currency, with the result that the Federal Reserve System will be stripped of its misbegotten status as the de facto world central bank. As soon as foreign holdings of Federal Reserve notes and bank balances denominated in those notes no longer consist of the de facto world reserve currency, uniquely useful for international payments, they will be repatriated to the United States, causing massive depreciation in the currency's domestic purchasing power. In addition, the ability of the general government to float endless amounts of public debt in order to cover its profligate expenditures will come to depend upon ever-increasing injections of new currency into this country's economy through monetization of that debt by the Federal Reserve System, just as some poor devil addicted to heroin requires ever more potent fixes as time goes by. When the resulting hyperinflation guts the value of Federal Reserve notes, the free market's elaborate structure of price denomination in those notes will become utterly deranged. Production, transportation, distribution, and even consumption of goods and services through markets dependent upon rational prices for the allocation of resources will be rendered problematic, if not in many instances impossible, and a large segment of America's population will be ground down to the lowest common denominator of living standards, while suffering the chaos of extensive and intensive civil unrest and criminal activity, particularly in densely populated areas, as state and local police forces and other law enforcement, emergency management, and social services agencies prove unable to cope with this turmoil. The anarchy born of economic chaos will provide the occasion and excuse for public officials to invoke draconian emergency powers and then impose martial governance for the eminently practical reason that only military and paramilitary forces will be able to supply the boots on the ground and to apply the brute force necessary to bring the situation under those officials' control. This will not entail the restoration of law and order in the traditional sense because, as will be shown here and after, martial governance is not the product of any law consistent with the Declaration of Independence, the original Constitution, or the Bill of Rights, but it will supposedly wrest order out of chaos, although the order imposed by a few will generate and perpetuate many different forms of chaos in the lives of everyone else. It should be obvious, though, that if given a choice in the matter, the people who control the galaxy of Ponzi schemes orbiting the Federal Reserve System and the United States Department of the Treasury would be far more eager to continue to reap exorbitant profits from their peaceful operation of those scams than not only to suffer the collapse of those pyramids, but also to contend with the unpredictable vicissitudes of an attendant nationwide economic crisis and an attempt to impose martial governance on an angry and armed population. So the conclusion must be that events are now being driven to a dire terminus, to a decisive degree by the faults inherent in the design of this country's monetary and banking machinery, rather than by perpetual quirks or crimes of the machinery's original creators and present-day manipulators. That the machinery is today running out of control, indeed eventually always had to run out of control, provides them with no defense, however, quite the opposite. And with that, I will close this reading of Chapter 3 from Dr. Edwin Vieira's By Tyranny Out of Necessity, The Bastardy of Martial Law. It gives us something to think about and also a way of diagnosing the current situation in the year 2024, given that Dr. Vieira wrote this in 2015. The situation has gotten even more apparent and dire, and we can see the writing on the wall even more clearly. That should motivate us to become even more dedicated to the craft, to the way, to training. The way is in training, as Miyamoto Musashi wrote in his Book of Five Rings, the Gorin no Sho. So we dedicate ourselves even further to disciplining our minds, our bodies, our spirits, and the body of all of our affairs to comply with the principles of training, the principles of political economy, the principles of a life well lived, and to be not fooled by appearances, but by transcend them by the renewing of our minds. So with that, I would like to thank you for listening. If you do like what you've heard here, be sure to like and share. to recruit more people who might be interested in advancing a free society by way of the martial arts, a victorious mindset, and the principles of political economy. Until next time, stay sharp, stay aware, and be well.